Good morning, everyone. Tim Anderson here, aka Renfail, the bearded dwarven princess. And today, this morning, I've had coffee, I've had breakfast, and we're diving in today to something that we've discussed briefly in some previous videos, but I haven't actually gotten to it yet. I just talked about this in an interview I did recently with Liam from over at Liam's Lyceum, and that is the fact that Tolkien actually only overwrote 3 books related to Middle Earth. Think about that for a minute. And I know everyone's going to be saying, "Oh, but what about Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales and Lost Tales of Middle Earth?" We're going to discuss that in this video in great detail. So let's go. If this is your first time here, I'd like to say welcome to the channel. If you like this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get more updates like this. Don't forget we have the Mondays in Middle Earth series every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Central Time as we read through the entirety of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. So hopefully you'll tune in for those episodes as well. Don't forget we have a Discord, a gaming community, and I stream almost every single day. You can find more information about that in the descriptions here and in the Discord channel, or just check that bell notification so you get updates whenever I go live. All right, you guys ready? Everybody's ready? All right. So, if you look at the books that were actually published during Tolkien's lifetime, he only has 3 books that are related to Middle Earth. He has The Hobbit in 1937, then The Lord of the Rings in 1954, and then in 1962, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. Now, I know everyone's going to be jumping all over. That's not true. He wrote all these other things. They were just posthumously published. I get that. I understand that. I absolutely am on the same page with you to a degree because I love all of those works, including the Silmarillion, which is a part of my Mondays in Middle Earth series that we're currently reading through. But in terms of Rings of Power, and this is the rant part of this video, right? You have a lot of these so-called Tolkien experts coming out and using material from all of these posthumously published books as some sort of proof positive of what Tolkien meant to say, what Tolkien really wrote, so on and so forth. You also have these so-called experts and analysts and so on and so forth who like to look at the letters and say, well, he said this in a letter and what he wrote in the letter trumps what he published in the books. And I cry bullshit on that every single time. And here's why. By the way, I'm not discrediting those things as part of his working process, as part of his overall evolution of the series and everything else, but I have issue with that being used as some sort of proof positive as to why letters and posthumously published content should take precedence over the published material. And I get the argument that people have that, well, he was constantly tweaking and modifying and everything else. Okay, let me give you a perfect example in the modern era. George Lucas. George Lucas continually making tweaks to the original trilogy. Han, did he really shoot first? Or did Greedo shoot first? The endless debate because you have fans who are split on the original version when Han shot first, and the other ones who say, well, technically, George Lucas isn't dead yet and his vision isn't fully complete because he's continually tweaking and editing as he creates the overall story arc and gets it all narrowed down. Valid. Absolutely valid point. Both of those are valid points. However, and I would argue that up until the point George Lucas sold Lucasfilms and stopped being involved in the intellectual property that he created, he absolutely had the right to do so, and more importantly, until he's dead and or until he says it's finished, whichever comes first, no one should ever have considered the Star Wars films finished or the Star Wars story finished, which is why I circle back around to Tolkien. And I need to drink coffee before I can continue because it's still morning here. So this is the part where you can interject stuff if you want. All right, here's why this argument is crucial for me and my point of view. Tolkien was notorious for continually finding little things in The Lord of the Rings after it was published that he continually course corrected, but they weren't storyline elements, they weren't plot elements for the most part. They were little things like elf and dwarf wasn't capitalized properly, or it wasn't spelled the way he wanted it to be, or there were issues with the translated texts of elvish and dwarvish. Those were the little things, and they were admitted up until, I believe, the most recent, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe the most kind of comprehensive version of the Lord of the Rings that we have is the 50th anniversary edition, which is the version that I kind of have settled on because that's the one where we've pretty much gotten all of the little things done that were complained about during his lifetime, and we've course corrected all those little things. But those weren't storyline elements. Those were little things, typeset errors, and so on and so forth that were just a natural part of the physical typesetting era before we got to digital and word processors and being able to edit things and send those edits to an international database where people can access those things. So if you look at the way this actually works, Tolkien only ever published 3 books in his lifetime that were related to the Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And The Adventures of Tom Bombadil don't really count in the greater scope of what is in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now, there's going to be arguments for people who say, yeah, but Tolkien said in the letters, and he said, I don't care. I say hundreds of things in my notes, and I will continue to say things in my notes. But once I have gotten to the point where I have published something, once it's published, that's it. It's finished. That is the finished version. Now, I can make a revision to that version later on, and the revised version becomes the new canon version. But that only applies if that happens while I'm alive and I'm the person authorizing that, and I'm the person who's behind that, and I'm the person saying, this is the revision that I want to make. If I leave notes for something and then someone else interprets those notes and then someone else goes and makes those revisions, that's not the same thing. And that's where we get sort of this blurry line of what is or isn't really Tolkien and what Tolkien did or didn't really say or what Tolkien did or didn't really mean in his finished works. So the point that I make is I consider The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings to be the definitive edition. Those are the actual works of J.R.R. Tolkien, right? That doesn't mean I don't enjoy and consider the other things like the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales and the History of Middle Earth and the Children of Hurin and Beren and Luthien, the Fall of Gondolin, and all of these other things. It's not that I don't consider those things to be additional supplemental material, because I very much do, but I don't think when you're talking from a rights perspective, when you're talking about what do the rights holders actually have access to? Think about that for a minute. Whether it's the Peter Jackson films or the Bakshi film or the other animated feature films or the Rings of Power that's coming up, what do the rights holders have access to? The rights holders have access to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. End of story. Fin discussion. That's where the rights end. And so that's what they have to work with, and that's what they have to play with. The published works of J.R.R. Tolkien begin and end with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings as far as official works go that rights holders have access to, which means all of these other works, which I enjoy and I consider to be part of the Middle Earth library, the Silmarillion, Book of Lost Tales, History of Middle Earth series, Unfinished, all that stuff, I do absolutely consider those to be part of Middle Earth. However, they are not part of the official publications of J.R.R. Tolkien. And they are not part of the rights discussions when people are arguing about what should or shouldn't be in the actual films or the Rings of Power. This also comes into play, like I said, with the Tolkien experts who will like to say things like, well, Tolkien said in this letter over here that this was this. That doesn't apply. That's not a published work. That's not a published piece of licensed work that can be referenced as part of what is actually going to be on screen as part of the adaptation. We can't talk about that. We can't consider that. Furthermore, talking about all these other things, which is this is the one I get hung up on. You got guys like Corey Olson who will say that, well, Tolkien might have said in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings that dwarven women look just like men, and he said in The Hobbit more than 30 times that dwarves have beards, therefore all dwarves have beards, and all dwarven women look like men, therefore all dwarven women have beards. He then went and said, Tolkien never said that, and by the way, look at all these other works that were published 30, 40, 50, 60 years after his death, and we have all of these things over here that say that dwarves don't have beards. That doesn't count. That's not actual licensable source material that you're allowed to use for the actual material that's going to be on screen. You are limited to what's in the published works that are officially licensed and officially part of that rights library that has been sold for film adaptation. This also gets into the beyond just the rights discussion about what's going to be on the shows. I've seen a lot of people coming on my Rings of Power videos and making statements about how Tolkien said that, you know, dwarves were based on Jews. Therefore, Tolkien is a racist because he made dwarves greedy, only interested in money, and that was his interpretation of the Jews. Where did Tolkien ever say that? Please show me where Tolkien actually ever said that in a official Lord of the Rings capacity, because the letters don't count. The letters are just conversations. They are not part of the actual published Lord of the Rings material where we have a library that says, I wrote dwarves to be exactly like the Jews because I find the Jews to be a greedy race that's only cares about money, and therefore I'm making the dwarves like the Jews. Where does he ever actually say that in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings? The letters don't count. It doesn't count. It's like if I'm having a conversation with a friend and I'm referencing something that I've written, and I say, well, one of the many frames of reference was this. You can't point to that and say that's the definite version, because what I've written and published is the definite version. There might be 100, there might be 200, there might be 5, 10, whatever frames of reference for what inspired a race or an event or a particular character. But what is important is what is written and published in the official work. And once that's written and published, that's it. That's the canon version. So I have a hard time giving any credibility to people whose argument swings entirely upon, well, Tolkien said this in his letters, or Tolkien said this in one of the posthumously published works that were written, put together by his son 40, 50 years. I digress, everybody. So at the end of the day, my Rings of Power rant today is all about how if you look at what the rights holders have, what they're using for the adaptation, right? It needs to be focused on the actual works that they have the rights to, which is The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Those are the only two things that they have the rights to. And all of these discussions about what was or wasn't said in the Silmarillion, or what was or wasn't said in the histories of Middle-earth, or the Lost Tales, or the Children of Hurin, or Beren and Luthien, none of that matters because it doesn't pertain to the official, published, licensed works of J.R.R. Tolkien as approved by the Tolkien estate and Saul Zaentz to some degree. Food for thought. Love to hear your thoughts and comments below. Don't forget, if you've gotten this far and you like the video, to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates like this in the future. I'd love it if you smash that super thanks button, buy me a cup of coffee. It's a great way to support the channel and say thanks for the content that you consume. You can also join as a member. If you really want to go above and beyond, there's a Patreon page for that world map behind me. It's called patreon.com/wandering hermits. The wandering hermits being myself, my brother, and my wife, creating the world, weaving the void. The tabletop books are out in June 2022. Point and click game like King's Quest is out later this year. You can play the demo now on the Patreon page. And you also have a book. It's a lot like Dragonlance being published in a serialized format a few times a month. All that's over at the Patreon page. So pick up a subscription there if you would prefer. Hopefully, we'll see you over there. Here's a member or in Discord. Don't forget the links are down there. And stick around for the next Rings of Power or Mondays in Middle Earth video, which come out every Monday at 11 a.m. as we read through The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion, and continue our march to the Rings of Power official release date coming up in September of 2022. Love you guys. Hope you have a good discussion. I'm really looking forward to hearing people's thoughts and opinions on the extended works of Middle Earth and whether or not they actually apply when we're talking about licenses and rights, because that's the most important part of this conversation.